think you guys should take that on tour. Yeah, I'll tell you what, especially the congas and the maracas there, that would make it quite a show on the road, wouldn't it? Thank you so much, choir. We appreciate it. It's nice seeing them in this spot too, isn't it? Right? You didn't have to kind of turn sideways. You were like right on. Really appreciate that. And to think about how many of those people up here singing have been working so hard all week and put on that great performance last night, we really appreciate it. So this question is not just for everyone who performed last night, but this is for all of you, and that is this. Are you one of those people who needs a cup of tea or coffee to get started at the beginning of the day? Yeah, some of you are? Right. Has something to do with the caffeine maybe? Now, I could have just said coffee, but I don't drink coffee, so I have to say tea as well, right? Okay, just want you to know that. So, do you need the caffeine to wake up your body? No. Do you need the caffeine to wake up your mind so you can think clearly? Okay, yeah. I know you're thinking higher thoughts. You're thinking deeper thoughts. I'm just thinking at surface level. I understood where you're going with that. Perhaps both. Maybe you feel like you need the caffeine to stimulate your body and to stimulate your mind, right? To kind of get you going in the morning. Now, we all know, as Bruce was implying, that we don't really need it, but we sort of depend on it, right? Okay. How many of you, if you have a really bad headache, would consider taking Excedrin, because not only does it have aspirin, but it also has caffeine, right? So, because we understand that the caffeine works together with the aspirin to intensify or to help the healing or the pain relief process. So, something as simple as caffeine illuminates what we sometimes refer to as the mind-body connection. You hear that a lot, right? Mind-body connection. How many of you like those Snickers commercials? Have you seen those? You are not you when you are hungry. Okay. If you've seen them, I assume those of you who are kind of laughing and smiling, you've seen these, right? Yeah. If you haven't, just go on YouTube. My two favorites are Betty White and Robin Williams, and those are really funny to watch. But you are not you when you are hungry. Don't they also reveal something to us about the connections between the body and the mind and the spirit? These silly commercials illustrate that when we are hungry, that hunger can profoundly affect our peace of mind, our mood, our character, the way we respond, the way we deal with things. But what or who exactly is the you that they are referring to in that commercial? Now think about this for a minute. You are not you when you are hungry. Does that mean that you are not your body, that you are your body, and that when your body is hungry, it is not itself? What about the mind? Maybe it is when you're hungry, your mind is not, yourself. But both of these seem a little off the mark, right? Maybe it's just me, but to me they seem just a little bit off the mark. You see, as a religious person, I would also say that we are more than just a mind and a body. We are also a spirit. Who you are and who I am is more than just digestion and metabolism. I don't know if anybody agrees with that statement or not. You all look very thoughtful. What is metabolism? Right. What is digestion? What is thinking? Okay. Maybe we all need a cup of coffee or tea or something this morning. I don't know. We should do, well, that's why we have coffee out there before worship, right? So you can understand what the preachers try to talk about. Okay, there we go. But I think we are more than just digestion and metabolism. We are more than just information processors. We are also creatures of will, creatures of free will, creatures of choice. Neither the body nor the mind can account for our freedom of choice. For instance, let's go back to the headache. You have a strong headache, and you know that you can take that combination of aspirin and caffeine, and that probably will have a very good effect on relieving the headache. But that doesn't tell me that you're willing to do it. I know there's at least one person in my household, and it's not me, who will not take an aspirin for a headache. That's a choice, right? I can imagine that there are people among us who prefer not to do that. For instance, you might hear a voice in your body that says, aspirin relieves pain, but what else can it do? It can hurt your stomach, right? Okay. Caffeine helps aspirin to work more effectively, but what else can caffeine do to you? It can affect your heart, right? It can cause heart palpitations, especially excessive amounts of caffeine. So even if it's an effective remedy, you realize you still have to make a choice. It does not guarantee that you will take it, because you think, in my own best interest, maybe I should just endure the pain of the headache. This is the meaning of free will. Making a choice. Making a choice that doesn't always agree with the body and the mind. And you're thinking, wait a minute. Isn't it my mind that's telling me to take the aspirin? Isn't that where the choice takes place? And I'm going to counter with this question. Isn't it your body that is telling you to take the aspirin? But what accounts for the fact that you take it or don't take it? I'm going to say it's not the mind. I'm going to say it is the spirit. So let's talk for a minute about 3 very painful words in our vocabulary: diet, exercise, and fasting. Okay? Are these 3 activities simply bodily activities? No. What else do they require? Do they have a mental component? We have to be reminded, you need to get up, you need to go walking, you need to don't eat that food or whatever. Isn't there a mental component? But there's still that component of choice, of free will. Your body is hungry. And if there is hunger, there is food, okay? And the mind presents you with options. A, you could go down the road to the all-you-can-eat buffet. That is a surefire way to deal with hunger. Am I right? Okay. B, eat a responsible meal at home. Okay, I realize that's probably less appealing than A, right? How about C? Let's get on a diet program. And then we really have to be careful about what we eat. And D, we could choose not to eat at all. Just because my body is hungry, just because my mind says do something about it, it doesn't mean that I have to do it. I may decide that I'm going to fast. For instance, I should say, which do you choose and how do you explain your choice? So for instance, you might say to yourself, I really should eat a sensible meal. I really should go on a diet, but let's go to Golden Corral. I mean, how do you explain that? You look so intense today, right? Maybe I'm just making you think very deep thoughts here. I don't know. But you think about it. How do you account for the fact that you wind up at the Golden Corral instead of Jenny Craig, or how do we wind up doing one or the other? That's the question. Where does that reside? And I'm going to argue that it is an act of the will, and the will resides in the human spirit. Each person is 3-dimensional: body, mind, and spirit. And it is in the spiritual dimension where we draw from our creativity, right? Our musical talent, our religious disposition, and our will. It is as spiritual beings that we have the ability to choose, to exercise control over our bodies and minds. So, for instance, we just ended Lent a few weeks ago, right? Well, maybe more than I'll lose track of time. But if you gave up coffee or tea or caffeine in general, if you gave up sweets, whatever, for Lent, I know that at least for 7 days, there was a point in the day in which your body said, caffeine, coffee, right? And your mind was like, you really want that caffeine to make you stop feeling this way. But why did you choose not to take it? Was it not because you made a choice, a religious decision, to follow in the footsteps of Christ by doing this one thing? Exercising control over what? Over the body and over the mind. And we do that with the Spirit. In my next message, which will be 2 weeks from today, we will talk more about the mind and how it fits into this whole concept of hearing the voice of God. But for the moment, I'll just say the following things. Tell me if I'm wrong. There are many things that go on in our own minds that confuse us. Intrusive thoughts that we did not ask for. Am I the only one that has intrusive thoughts? Okay, at least a third of us, right? Ideas that seem to come out of nowhere. Voices that tell us things like, hey, you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, or you're no good. You never were any good. We hear those voices, don't we, in our minds. The processes that go on in our minds sometimes make us feel as if we are strangers even to ourselves. Am I right? Remember, May is Mental Health Month, Mental Health Appreciation Month. Where did that come from, we ask ourselves. The mind is like a computer. It is a product of input. It is a product of our environment, our education, our conditioning, even our language or languages, depending on who we are and where we are on that spectrum, shall we say. The mind is like an operating system on a computer, whereas our bodies are like what? Hardware. You know, and when computers really started coming out and people were thinking, are they going to take over the world or not? There was always this talk about, what do they call it? The ghost in the machine. Remember that? That language. Because you have the hardware, which I'm comparing to the body, and you know the computers are based on the human mind. You have this operating system. But even artificial intelligence as it exists even today, no matter how much people talk about it, even artificial intelligence is subject to its programming. There still has to be a programmer. There still has to be an actor doing the programming. And so that's what I'm saying about us. The body is our hardware. The mind is our operating system. The Spirit is the one that acts. The human spirit is the real you, the real me. Greek Orthodox, he's French, but he's an Orthodox scholar named Jean-Claude Larchet puts it this way. The body needs the soul in order to live and move, whereas the soul needs the body in order to reveal itself, to express itself, and to act on the external world. I hope that statement makes sense to you. But just to make it easier for you, I'm going to give it to you in my own twisted, weird sense of humor in the form of 2 questions. Are you ready for this? Okay. What do you call a spirit without a body? A ghost. What do you call a body without a spirit? Or a zombie. Right? Yeah. We are something more than that. Okay. So far we have talked about tea and coffee and aspirin, caffeine, candy bars, computers, operating systems, and now ghosts and zombies. You've got it all here in the course of 10 minutes or so. and you thought sermons had to be boring. You didn't think they could be really out there in left field. But what is the point of all this? To begin with, I wanted to establish the links between the body and the mind. Okay? Additionally, I wanted to make the point that even the mind and the body do not account for everything that we do. They absolutely do not. I'm thinking this way, but I'm acting this way. There is a third component there. Thus, we needed to establish the existence of that third and highest dimension of humanity, the dimension of the human spirit. And now we need to talk about why. What's the what for here? So this is the second message in a series that I am given the umbrella title of Turn Your Radio On. Listening for the voice of God. Right? Fine-tuning the life of the Spirit. Last week's message was called Turning Your Radio On, Listening for the Voice of God. And in that message, we talked about the young Samuel in the temple in which he was serving. He had not yet learned to recognize the voice of God. Right? And then we talked about Elijah, who was a prophet who got so deeply wound up in his work as to become unable to hear the voice of God. From these two different prophets, I wanted us to understand two aspects of tuning in or of listening for the voice of God. The first aspect is simply learning how to listen for and to discern the voice of God. Because as I've already sort of talked about, we have other voices that we hear, right? How do we distinguish these? Okay. God spoke to Samuel, but in a sense, Samuel was not yet tuned in, right? I'm going to use all the puns I can here. He was not yet tuned in. The other aspect which we observed in the life of Elijah is that sometimes we get so involved in what we are doing, okay? So bogged down in what we're doing, so busy as the pastor of a church, so busy as the minister of music and outreach of the church, so busy as the nominating committee chair, or so busy as the board chair, or as the vice board chair, or as a elder or deacon, or all the service guild. Anything we do in the service of the congregation, sometimes we can get so bogged down into it as that we no longer hear the voice of God. Right? I don't know if you've had that experience, but I will tell you, April was a great time to take a sabbatical for me, right? To just kind of get back to that place where I could tune in to God. Sometimes our perspective becomes distorted and we begin a slide into the unhealthy aspects of the mind. And that's why you see ministers and church leaders and political leaders and all kinds of other people who are great leaders or are well, anointed, spirit-filled or whatever, who can go down the wrong path. Because sometimes they get so deep in their own business, shall we say, that they are no longer able to hear the voice of God, and they get into those unhealthy aspects of the mind. That is, sometimes we cannot listen for God's voice because there is too much static, right, or interference. What are the kinds of static or interference that we experience? Some of them are mental, and some of them are physical, and there are others, but we'll keep it simple for the moment. We will save the mental aspects for the next message 2 weeks from today. This message today is about the types of physical interference that come between us and God, the things that kind of make it hard for us to hear the voice of God. How does the body hinder us in the listening for the voice of God? What are some of the bodily distractions? I will tell you, without listing them all, you can do this on your own because I'm sure each one of you are thinking already of things. How about fatigue? How about fatigue? Too much work, not enough sleep can easily affect our access to the Spirit. This is why we quoted Matthew 26:41. What did Jesus say to his disciples? Stay awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. But as you know from this passage, the disciples, despite their best efforts, were physically exhausted. So every time Jesus returned to them, what did he do? He saw them sleep. Just totally. Therefore, they were unable to be receptive to the Spirit because of the simple fact of the physical exhaustion of their bodies. Moving on, if we had time, if you guys didn't have anywhere to go, your bodies weren't telling you to eat food. Okay, I should never say that during a sermon, should I? We could just spend our whole day reading Paul's letter to the Romans, or at least we could read chapters 6, 7, and 8. But I'm going to spare you that today, okay, out of consideration. But if you were to sort of focus in on chapter 6 through 8, I think you will agree with me, or at least you may consider agreeing with me, that Paul's discussion revolves around this same topic. So in chapter 7, verses 15 through 20, we find these very familiar words. I do not understand my actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. I bet none of you relate to this, right? I'm being facetious, of course. Now, if I do what I do not want, I agree that the law is good, but in fact, it is no longer I who do it, but the sin that dwells within me. For I know that the good does not dwell within me, that is, in my flesh. Let's make a distinction here. For the desire to do the good lies close at hand, but not the ability. I think that's another way of saying the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. You guys are great. For I do not do the good I want. I do not eat a sensible meal. I go to corral. The evil that I do not want to do is what I do. None of you can relate to that either, right? Okay. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. Now, let me exercise a little word of caution. Even though we see words in here like sin and evil related to the word flesh, I think if we do a very careful and close reading of what Paul has written in Romans, and of course the statement from Jesus, and I want to say the rest of the New Testament. The Bible does not say body equals bad. Okay? Now this is me talking. You can disagree with me, but I want you to consider this thought. The Bible does not say body equals bad. Flesh equals bad. What I think we can get out of Paul's words here and the rest of Romans and a quote from Jesus and so forth is the following idea. The body is subject to sin. The body is weak. And also the body is subject to what else? Something that we all will face one day, and that is death. This is the point that I think we need to be very careful to understand. The Bible never sees the body itself as bad. Okay? This is why I included that very well-known passage from Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Pay special attention to the fact that God created the physical body before he filled it with the Spirit. Right? Now that's from Genesis 2. If we go back to Genesis 1 and read the creation account, God made this and God made that, and he looked at what he had made, and what did he say? It is good. Okay, right. Thank you. Throughout the Bible, the body is never opposed to the spirit in a sort of good versus evil scenario. And this is something that I think we really need to get clear on. To say spirit good, body bad is bad theology. And it is highly influenced by Greek philosophies like Gnosticism. And we hear a lot about Gnosticism these days, right? Especially around Christmas and Easter when all the channels are doing the documentaries about the Gospel of Judas or whatever. There was also an early Christian heresy called Docetism, which had something to do with denying that Jesus rose bodily from the grave. In other words, These people were saying, well, Jesus was resurrected, but not his body, because body equals bad. The church said very resoundingly, that is not true, that is a heresy. The New Testament itself attests to the fact that Jesus was raised with a body. What did he say to Thomas? Touch me. Come, feel the scars. Okay? I mean, unless he was tricking him, which I don't think so, right? He asked the disciples, do you have some food? And he took food and he ate it. In other words, the New Testament is very clear that there is a resurrection body. Whatever that means, we don't understand it. But it doesn't say body bad, if that makes sense. Okay. Paul, like Jesus in Matthew 26:41, is saying that the flesh, the body, is subject to weakness. The flesh can be exhausted, right? It can be tired. As we observed with the disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane, they couldn't stay awake and pray with Jesus. They were flat out just pooped. And Elijah, after all of those dramatic events in which he opposed King Ahab and Queen Jezebel and 450 prophets of Baal and all the wonders and miracles that occurred in his ministry, was so mentally and physically exhausted that he said to God, what? Just kill me. Most of us would be thinking, I'm pretty hot stuff. Look at all this great stuff I did. And Elijah's like, I can't go on. And he got to where he couldn't hear God's voice after all those dramatic things until he got quiet and he could hear in the silence that still small voice. Weakness opens the doorway to sin. The flesh is weak. The flesh is subject to the, hunger, cancer, amputation. I mean, there are all kinds of things that can affect the body and therefore influence the mind and even the spirit. To paraphrase, let's return to Romans 7:18 for a second. What did Paul say? For I know that the good does not dwell within me, that is, in my flesh. For the desire to do the good lies close at hand, but not the ability. It's a very important distinction here. We know the good that we should do. We do not always do it because what? We have a body that's pulling on us. You are not you when you are hungry. You are not you when you are exhausted. Now, that's not exactly true, but the idea is that they have an effect on us. How then can we have this desire to do good if it does not reside in our flesh? The answer, it resides within our spirit. Now look at the words of Paul in chapter 8, verses 13, 15 through 16, which Peggy read for us earlier. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. Now you're still in the body, right? But by the Spirit, we overrule the body. That's why when we fast, we say, yes, you're hungry. Yes, it will help me to feel better. But no, I'm not going to do it because I am observing Lent. I am doing this out of my religious devotion. For you did not, I love this, you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear. You received a spirit of adoption. When we cry, Abba, Father, it is that very Spirit bearing witness with our spirit, not with our body. It's not that spirit testifying or bearing witness to our flesh. It is that Spirit bearing witness to our spirit that we are the children of God. So once again, let me emphasize the importance. Read all of Romans 6 through 8, right? To get that more completely and fully understood. But hopefully my summary has been enough. So let's go back to that commercial just for a second. You are not you when you are hungry. Isn't that a way of saying that the flesh is weak? Isn't our dependence on tea or coffee in the morning an example of flesh being subject to fatigue? Sorry, I can't talk. And that fatigue can affect our mental and spiritual state? I think so. To expand this idea just a little bit, think about different kinds of depression. Now, odds are that the vast majority of us in this room have experienced some kind of depression. Okay? That's not to say anything bad about anybody. It's just a fact, just based on numbers. There is a bodily type of depression that results from a condition in the thyroid. It is totally physical. It can be addressed with medicine. But if you don't know that, it may cause you to have a spiritual problem. Why am I depressed? I don't understand it. But it is actually resulting from the body. There is also a type of depression, or several types of depression, that can come from issues within the brain and within the mind that influence not only our spiritual state, but also our physical state. Because what happens when you get depressed? You don't eat, or you eat too much. You don't sleep, or you do nothing but sleep, right? So there are physical states. And then, of course, I would argue, I think we can make a great case for it, that there is a type of spiritual depression. And if you know a minister or a theologian or professor or pastor's wife or co-pastors or so forth, I want to try to include everybody in here, including Miss Dolores Tremue, who's been with Reverend Dr. Tremue for many, many years throughout all of these ups and downs of the ministry. There is a depression that can come on from the ministry, from serving God, from saying, I put myself out here, I did all this work, and this is where I wound up. I don't mean First Christian Atlanta. I mean, other circumstances, right? And that can affect us mentally, physically as well. In short, we are all three. We are a body, we are a mind, and we are a spirit. And they all influence one another. But it is with our spirit that we have our closest contact with God. Again, to quote Paul, my favorite one, when we cry, Abba, Father, I underlined it for you there, it is that very spirit bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And once again, notice that the word spirit is written two different ways in this verse. You notice that? There is a capital S spirit, which refers to God, the Holy Spirit. And there is a lowercase s spirit that refers to you and me. Sometimes when we read through those verses too quickly, we miss those nuances and we don't understand them. Paul is saying that God is spirit and you're a spirit. We are spirit. And it is at that level that we most closely connect with God. And that is where we feel that kinship. And that is from that spiritual connection that we are able to say to God, Daddy, Father. Turning our radio on, if I may use my phrase again, is a way of talking about opening up our spirit to receive this word from God's Spirit. But again, we experience interference of all kinds, which we've been talking about. It can occur that if interference can occur is simply a result of being embodied, to being in a flesh and blood physical body, but also of possessing a mind. When we are at our best, when we are at our healthiest, we function very strongly by keeping them in balance. But in fact, we live in a world where some of the interference results from a denial of the Spirit. Would you agree with me that there are many components in our society that deny the Spirit? Yeah. Whether they resist it or say that it doesn't even exist. We could also say that some of the interference that we experience results from an overemphasis on the body. Okay? All you got to do is watch commercials. Okay? Because it could be a diet pill or, shall we say, many other kinds of pills that are speaking to us about things that are bodily. And they have a way of making us think that the only thing that really matters is the matters of the body. Imagine how much time and money is spent in a year's time by people in general trying to improve the body compared to what they spend on trying to live more fully into the Spirit. Yeah. If we live more fully into the Spirit, there'd be less soccer games going on at this moment. Or baseball or basketball or whatever, right? Just one example. My point is this. If we want to be open to the voice of God, that is, if we want to get closer to God, have a deeper experience of God's presence, we need to learn how to orient our body, even our bodies, in connection or in the direction of God. In a simple way, we could say it means to eat well and to sleep well. These two practices can help create a sense of well-being that enhances the mental and the spiritual. But from a spiritual point of view, it also means we have to recognize that the body and the mind serve the Spirit. Does that make sense? The body and the mind should serve the Spirit. And when they do not serve the Spirit, we are out of order. The spiritual dimension is where our creativity, our love, our religious disposition, and our will to choose reside. And it is as spiritual beings that we have the ability to choose to exercise control over what we do with our bodies and with our minds. And most importantly, to echo Paul once again, it is with our spirit that we come into contact with God's Spirit. I do hope and pray that I made sense out of all that for you. We still have 2 more to go, and I will do my best to be as clear and direct as possible.